Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Friday, Friday the 13th, no less, and this is the time of the week when a lot of booktubers start to think about retrospective videos, Friday reads, weekend reading reports, check-ins of one kind or another, as a flag planted, as a status marker, not necessarily just for viewers, but also for your own recognition, for your own records of what you've read, what you are reading, what you plan on reading. I like Friday reads. I love watching them as videos, so I've been making a conscious effort to make them myself rather than just barreling along. Uh, I've got a bunch of books that I want to show you. I guess we could start with this thing. We saw an advanced copy of this. This is a finished copy of the latest Inspector Galileo novel from Keigo Higashino, about the beleaguered Japanese police force that regularly has recourse to this enigmatic, eccentric crime solver. It's a popular series, from what I gather in Japan. It's a popular series. It hasn't really worked its magic with me all that much. But this is the finished copy. This comes out in a week. This comes out in, or actually not a week. This is Friday, so it comes out on Tuesday. It's a December release in hardcover. That's an uphill climb right there. But I'll give it another try. I always feel like this is one of those series where I always feel like I might be doing it a disservice, giving it a little bit of a short shrift when I shouldn't. If, of course, there's a strong chance that the reason why this isn't having the effect on me that it has on thousands of Japanese readers is because it's translated. I can't read the original, so it could be just that the translation saps the life out of it. I would like to think that I'm assuming that the author can read English and would know or would be told by friends if the translation wasn't quite doing it. But it could also be that there are elements that are untranslatable. We will see. I will give it another try. I had the advanced copy and haven't touched it out of my lack of enthusiasm for the series, but I'll give this finished copy a try. Then we have, I've got the iPad for all of the others here. Like, for instance, I'm going to reread the Robert Graves translation of The 12 Caesars by Suetonius. Robert Graves' translation of this thing has held sway for the better part of a century. It's chatty and conversational and very knowing. It gets a little squirrely in the commentary, but it's been a staple of Penguin Classics forever and ever. And I don't know for sure the numbers, but I would guess that if Robert Graves had had an ordinary publishing career, this would have been the moneymaker for his entire life, because this thing was bought by the carton loads for schools. Robert Graves would have had an ordinary publishing career, like his contemporaries to the left and right of him, six deep, if he hadn't written I, Claudius. I'm pretty sure that I, Claudius has outsold anything that he has ever done, but this is the kind of thing that an author prays for. This or the Neville Coghill Canterbury Tales, something that will go in schools by the bucket load. And I want to reread it, not only because I realized rather shamefacedly how long it's been since I sat down and read an English language translation of Suetonius from front to back, instead of picking and choosing little things here and there, but also because there's a new translation of the 12 Caesars coming out in 2025. So that raises the interest level for me. Then we have a bunch of 2024 releases on this list that I'm either going to reread or talk to you about that I haven't got to. This is one of the ones that I haven't got to yet. This is by Catherine Nixie, and it's called Heretics, and it's about early Christian traditions and also pre-Christian traditions of a Jesus figure, of a Messiah figure, a Son of God figure, a Lamb of God figure. This was a booming, very popular subgenre of fiction in the Near Middle East in the century before and after what we consider to be the birth of the one and only Jesus. I'll be interested to see what this author can do with it. You would pretty much have to ransack non-Christian traditions, because Christianity, organized Christianity, did an incredibly thorough job of destroying any evidence that these things had ever existed, that these other traditions had ever existed. Their traces remain even in the Gospels, even in the New Testament, traces remain, but not nearly as many. We had, once upon a time, it stands to reason, we had hundreds and hundreds of what we would call Gospels for a dozen different Jesuses, a dozen different figures who fit this relatively Dionysiac mold. So I'd be interested. I don't know this author. I don't think I'll be interested to see what she does with what little she has to work with. Then the next author is John Haywood. This is his book Ocean. Much like writing a thorough history of Jesus type stand-in figures, where you really don't have a lot of not as much documentation as you would want to go on. Same thing here. This is a history of the ocean before Columbus, which of course means human exploration. This is not a natural history of the oceans or ocean life. But the same problem crops up because the actual remit of this book, A History of the Atlantic Before Columbus, isn't writable. There aren't sources for it. So you're going to have to do a lot with a little here. And I've seen it tried. Usually when you get a history of the sea, a history of the ocean, whatever, obviously that refers to a history of humanity sailing on the seas and wrecking on the seas and fighting on the seas and trading on the seas. It doesn't refer to the seas themselves, obviously. Not only because a lot of indigenous peoples who would have been there long, long before the main stars of the show here left no records, but also because without humans crossing the ocean, without humans on the Atlantic, without the human story of interacting with the Atlantic, you don't really have history. History is an account of things happening. And things only happen if you can comment on them. If someone, it's the Heisenberg principle. It's the human principle. History only happens if you can make a story out of events. So I don't know if I'm making this clear. I seem never to make myself clear on Friday Reads, but what I'm trying to say is that in 4 billion years, no history has ever happened on the planet Jupiter. If that makes any sense. And the same thing is true of the Atlantic Ocean, where it just is. It's not any history. It's not a story of any kind. It's not a narrative or even the absence of a narrative. It just is. All the human elements are not there. I mean, if a tree falls in the forest and a historian isn't there to write about it, we'll see. This is obviously going to be about Atlantic seafaring cultures. I've read a lot of books like that. They can be very good. This is a 2024 release. I mean to get to as many of those as possible. Okay, this next one is not a 2024 release. This is by Gene Austen, and it is called Texan Killer, originally titled Green Country. With a young man there who has a bandana, his hands bound. He's being led at rifle point by a sheriff, but he's also being laid in wait for. Maybe that guy's going to shoot him. Maybe that guy's going to shoot the sheriff. Either way, it's going to be dicey. And this is called a perma book, but I can tell you, this thing is not permanent at all. This is not going to take much of a read. I dipped into it in the spirit of Friday Reads. I read the first chunk of it, the first chapter, and rather liked it. Rather liked the writing style. Not nearly as dumb and, boys on adventure as a lot of the westerns that I've read for June on the Range. So I have high hopes. Not a long thing. It's 150 pages, so not much. Then this next one is a reread. This is Donald Prothrow's book, The Princeton Field Guide to Prehistoric Mammals. One of the entries in their long list of these field guides. I love these things. Absolutely love them. The latest one they did was predatory dinosaurs. But this is about all of the things that took the niches of dinosaurs once the dinosaurs were gone. All the giant mammals, all the savage, weird in-between animals, the bear dogs and the dog bears and the wildebeest crocodiles and whatnot. This is all sorts of animals, some of whom, the tiny number of whom, went on and survived almost into the modern era. And lots of the animals featured in these pages certainly dealt with hominid species. If not modern humans, then certainly humans of one species or another. These things are slightly oversized. These field guides, they're full of charts and data and to-scale illustrations and also original color paintings and whatnot. They're wonderful. I read this. We saw this on this channel. I read this when it first came out. I praised it to the skies when it first came out a few years ago. I want to give it another reread this weekend. Then another 2025 release, I think this is. Or maybe it's a few years old. It cropped up on my shelf. I found it on my shelf. I was looking for something else. I definitely want to reread it. I thought it was really impressive. And now that I think about it, this was years ago. All the more important now. This is by David Sedlak, and it is called Water 4.0. Past, Present, and Future of the World's Most Valuable Resource. This is about water. It's about water that is drinkable. The author goes through, the reason it's 4.0 is because the author goes through 4 separate epochs of how humans have dealt with, controlled, domesticated water. Leading up to the present day, in which we have a vast and incredibly invisible undersystem of water. In technologized societies, we don't think about water at all. It gets delivered into our pipes. Someone somewhere along the line in some sort of bureaucracy is accountable for how pure it is when it gets to our pipes. Keep in mind, I'm filming this at the end of 2024, the last year when America had purified water, or a quality control agency for public water systems. I'm filming this at the end of 2024 instead of, for instance, at the end of 2025, when waterborne illnesses and all kinds of diseases are rampant throughout the country because water purification systems are no longer regulated or actively forbidden. But right now they are. Your water purification systems do, in large part, exist, except when they massively fail on a public scale, like in Flint, Michigan. The author talks about the ease of that, how that infrastructure just keeps the water flowing. And the author makes a rather strident point that infrastructure is not sustainable, that people have known it was not sustainable for a long time, and that we have to start paying attention to it because there is nothing more important at all. Making a conscientious effort to keep food supply chains working and sensible is nowhere near as important as keeping water flowing. Like, for instance, as I often have said on this channel, if your water stopped flowing out of your faucets, what would you do? If it stopped flowing out of your faucets today, what would you do? If water stopped flowing out of your faucets today, how much water do you have in the house that's usable, that's clean? How prepared are you to go from showering twice a day to showering once a year, or bathing with a sponge once a day with used water? Keep in mind, you would bathe with brown water, not clean water. How prepared are you to do any of that? Do you even know where the nearest source of clean, drinkable water from the natural world is to where you live? I bet you don't. And more importantly, not to lay the blame on you, I bet there isn't one within a long, long distance, a source of clean, drinkable water. I bet there isn't one within walking distance of where you are. If there is, you're lucky. But if you think that your pond or your roaring brook or whatnot is clean and drinkable, you should have it tested someday and see. I bet you'd be surprised at the results. This author goes into all of those details. This is it's the only example on this list, but it is a rare example of a book that literally everyone in the world should read. Then there's this next one. This is a work in translation. It's coming out in December, so I clean missed it for the year. It's translated by Brian Murdoch and edited by Leonard Nydorf, and it's Waltharius. This is a 10th century epic about Walther of Aquitaine. This volume is going to have, I have it on the shelf. It's going to have the English on one side and the Latin on the other. And lots of supporting material. That's good, because this thing had a huge life as a literary work. Everybody knew it when it was popular and circulating. Everybody knew it. Everybody knew the episodes in it. Everybody knew the attempts at characterization in it. I don't remember the last time this was translated. Certainly, this is the closest that it's ever come to having a popular translation in the last century. So we will see. I feel a little sorry that it's getting to me so late, so that I won't be able to include it on best translated literature if it turns out to be really good. Then this next one is by Andrew He. I showed you this before, but I have read it. I'm waiting for a physical copy. I loved it, though. Absolutely loved it. This is The Study. It's a book about this space. It's about the little book rooms. It's about the study during the Renaissance. The author makes some rather large claims in rather dry prose about the fact that the studies coming into existence fueled the Renaissance in lots of ways, in ways that we don't often give the importance that they're due. And I love that as an idea. I really wish the author would take 5 years to read Agatha Christie, take 5 years to read John le Carré, or take 5 years to read fiction, and steadily in the course of those 5 years add more research material to this book, and then rewrite the whole thing. Just rewrite it from front to back, keeping your hypothesis, which I think is correct. But even with a little bit of its academic drawbacks, one extremely sexy reviewer said that every book person should have a copy of this book. Every bibliophile, especially a bibliophile who has carved out a space like this, your own little room, should have a copy of this book. It's well worth it. I think it's an academic press, so it might be expensive, but it's really, really good. I seem to be having lighting problems again, only here the lighting is not going down, it's going up. I just can't seem to get the lighting right. We'll just blaze through the rest of these, because this doesn't need to be another 40-minute video. This next one is a romance, an ebook. This is by Ava McAdams, and it is A Gamble with the Rakish Duke, with, I believe, an AI cover. I'm surprised I'm not seeing more of these. It was 2 years ago that I predicted that these would be everywhere in covers, especially romance novels, and yet they aren't. I'm not sure why that is. The dumb pastel cartoon cover fad seems to be holding sway when these are much nicer and can do anything. The publishing industry, and especially the censors and scolds on social media, Twitter and Instagram and whatnot, have banded together against AI of any kind, including cover design. But this looks to be a fairly standard. You know, they met once, they loved each other, they were pulled apart. Will they get back together? We talked about one of those yesterday. I haven't read it yet, but I'm willing to give it a try. I think it is a January release. I think a lot of these things are January releases that I'm just batting clean up on. I haven't finished them yet. This next one's not a January release. This is from decades ago. This is by, in heavy, heavy air quotes, William Shatner, and it is Man-O-War. It's a novel about a William Shatner, T.J. Hooker stand-in and an all-purpose action hero who's here a kind of diplomat, which is interesting. A two-fisted diplomat is cut from the cloth of Retief by Keith Laumer, even though I am sure William Shatner does not know that. And I don't know who wrote this book. I know if you're young or you're a little bit naive, you'll say, well, William Shatner's name is big as life on the cover. But nevertheless, I don't know who wrote this book. I'm not 100% clear. His acknowledgments are a little bit vaguer than in a lot of the other stuff that he wrote, where his acknowledgments very clearly delineate who wrote the book. But this is the story of that diplomat who is sent on a mission to the technology corporation that runs a community on Mars, a subterranean community on Mars. And when he gets there, I mean, he's already in trouble on Earth. He's already got people looking for him on Earth. But when he gets to Mars, he encounters an iniquitous system, a system that has been significantly airbrushed in its press reports back to Earth, a system in which the technological overseers are basically slave overseers, and it's a system that needs smashing, and he's just the guy to do it. This was a lot of fun. This was a lot more fun than any book with William Shatner's name on it that I have ever read. I think it's the first book in a series. It doesn't feel like it's over at the end of the book. But I'm curious to know who wrote this for him, because some of the science involved, this is science fiction in the most nominal sense of the term. It's not really. It's basically the Texan Killer. But some of the science in here is not what a science illiterate person would do if they were writing a book like this. If William Shatner all by himself were to write a book like this, I feel certain that he would have domed cities on Mars, on the surface of Mars, which of course is not what you would do. You would have subterranean cities. Definitely you would. And there are a couple of other details as well. A couple of the research dumps on Mars here are a little bit more knowing. It's a science fiction author who wrote this, whoever it was, I think. But I enjoyed it in an innocent kind of way. I enjoyed it. Then another reread. I've read this a million times, and I did not. My copy does not have this cover. But this is Georgia Hare, and this is her book Devil's Cub, about just the worst rake hell in the world. Just the worst, most incorrigible womanizer and gambler and fighter and whatnot in the entire town, who, to cement his horrible reputation, abducts a woman and flees London. But he's abducted the wrong woman, and the sister of the woman who he abducts wants to go and find her or save her sister, and I bet you can guess what she ends up doing with him. And it's not arresting him. This is floridly overwritten and wonderful. Any of you who don't know this author, she is a treat, an absolute treat. And The Devil's Cub, I don't know. I won't say that it's her most popular book. The Corinthian might be her most popular book. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that anyone has kept records. I'm sure the records did once exist, but who is going to write a big biography of this author? Who's going to dig into those primary records? Who's going to find the cash receipts from her old publishers? Or accounts from bookstores and booksellers nearly 100 years ago? I worry that all that information is just slipping away, and that if somewhere down the line someone outside of America wants to write a biography of this person, they won't be able to do it. Once upon a time, I feel certain that there would have been documentation to tell us whether or not this sold better than any of her other romance novels. But I really liked it. I love it more every time I reread it. I did not read it with this. This is just a cover I pulled from online. I reread it in. I have a soft spot for old Signet Regency romances, and those old Signet Regency romances reprinted a few of Georgia Hare's books, including The Devil's Cup, which is the best of both worlds for me. And then we can finish up with this last one. This was a reread from a few years ago. This is by Gloria Dickey, and it is 8 Bears. I've shown you this before, but I saw it on the shelf. Once again, it was right next to something that I was rummaging around. I decided, well, it's been a while. Give it another reread. So I did. I really enjoyed it. I really like this book. It's about 8 major bears, 8 major kinds of bears. From the ones that you wouldn't know all that much about, like the spectacled bear, to the famous ones, to the grizzly and the brown bear and the polar bear, with the panda bear thrown in. And the author meditates on their natural history, meditates on a little of their cultural resonance. It's all very, very well done. I read this originally in a fever of topspin because I have met every one of these kinds of bears. It's true, I've only met a panda in captivity. They're nasty little things. Don't be fooled by how cute they are. They're like all bears. They're nasty little things. I've only met a panda bear in captivity. Never seen one, nor come across even sign of one in the wild. But all the others I have met or come across, seen in a distance in the wild. And some I've encountered far more directly than that. Not that I was ever happy about that fact, but some of them I've encountered far more directly than just seeing them at a distance from one valley top to another. And that element, the element of encountering these things and recognizing as soon as you do that they are merciless, blood-slavering engines of homicide, that element's missing from this book. This author is a fan of the bears that she describes. I'd be willing to bet, I'm a little bit unclear on the detail from my first time reading this, but I'd be willing to bet she's never encountered any of these species in the wild. some of her, gee, this must be horrifying. Some of her, gee, this must be horrifying stories about encountering a 10-foot tall creature that weighs a ton and wants to eat you. Some of her stories about encountering creatures like that have a very Fodor's and Fromer's Baedeker kind of secondhand wonder to them, where I don't get the impression that her own blood has ever frozen. But it does. When it happens to you, it does. But this is also wonderful. This was, for a couple of years there, we had a spate of bear books. And this was the best of them all. So I'm going to give this a reread tonight. And that is it. I'm going to reread the bear thing tonight, and I'm going to read this tonight. And who knows what else is coming in the mail. So, but I want to wrap this up before I am subsumed in sunlight. I can't, either the light is fading or the light is blazing. I'll get it right. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now. Of course, with the Friday reads, I want to know what you're reading, what you're working on. Was last week the week that's ending on Friday the 13th today? Was it a good reading week? Bad reading week? A couple of you wrote to me last week, ecstatic with how your reading weeks went. You had great reading weeks. And that's wonderful. One person wrote an email of a rather touchy defensive nature. Saying that he only read, I think, one book in the previous week, but spending most of his email talking about why that was, and how busy he is, and, not all of us can, and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I knew when I was starting that email how he was going to finish it. He was going to finish it by saying that he's brand new to my channel. I knew that because the rest of you know that I'm not rubbing your face in anything except when I'm joking. I made jokes just this week about you all reading at head injury speed. I kid. That's all. All the rest of you know that I'm in an almost unique position, so I don't expect you to be racking up numbers. And he eventually got there. I responded as forbearingly as I could, and he eventually got there to realize that I'm not lording any of this over anybody, obviously. But other people who wrote to me wrote in happiness. They included snide comments about how the fact that they read 4 books this week is what I read while I was also reading their email, things like that, little cracks like that. But they were happy, and that's wonderful to hear. That's wonderful to hear. Because there's nothing better. There's nothing that levens out a week's worth of chaos and strain than a lot of reading. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up before I am ascended bodily into heaven. But I will see you soon. Feel free to tell me about your week. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.